In a world where students write on screens, dictate to devices, and increasingly rely on digital tools, is handwriting a skill we still value or one we're quietly letting go of? And if we are letting go, what might we be losing when it comes to creativity and learning along the way? This would be the topic of our episode today. If this is of interest, then this show is just for you because we're welcoming handwriting specialist Holly Britton onto the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. Today we welcome to the show Holly Britton, who brings more than 26 years of experience in education, from classroom teacher to curriculum director and kindergarten coach. Central to her mission of helping children, teachers, and parents reach their creative potential is her work as a handwriting instruction specialist. She is a curriculum designer and also the founder of Squiggle Squad Handwriting, a unique approach to letter and number formation for early writers. Holly works with diverse learners who experience a wide range of learning challenges. She speaks nationally, writes, and teaches about handwriting as a kinesthetic connection to language essential to creativity and self-expression. Now, Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I heard on one of your earlier episodes that your podcast is in kindergarten at this point. And that's great because I work with kindergarten kids all the time.
I appreciate you bringing that up because we just published that episode as of recording last Tuesday, and Cindy brought that up, and it's a great way of phrasing our podcast. And one of the things I actually really like about it is we're allowed to make loads of mistakes. You know, we're kindergartners.
Yes, and learned from them.
Yeah. Give us a break. If we've upset you, offended you, dropped the ball, pronounced someone's name, come on. We're 5 years old.
That's right. We're still in training.
Yes.
Well, listen, full disclosure, when you reached out to us, I was really interested in this topic around handwriting, and full disclosure, I'm not someone who's good at handwriting, but it has been something that I've become increasingly aware of because my children go to parochial school, and we've got within our network of friends, a number of them are K through 12 educators. And one of the things that they tend to distinguish our children with when they kind of like look at the work or they're talking or see their work is, oh my God, look at their handwriting. And, you know, even colleagues at the University of Connecticut have said to me, if you do the blue books and the pencil and have people writing, to quote someone, they said, you'll see immediately who went to parochial school and who didn't in that moment. Now, I'm not here, I have no idea whether this is true or not true, but it has certainly raised my awareness that my kids are obviously having an experience in handwriting that maybe not everyone else has access to. And so that got me a little bit curious about this topic in general. But before we kind of begin to unpack handwriting, its relationship to creativity, I think what I'm really fascinated about is, you know, from a third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade teacher, which I think is where you kind of finished. Holly, I'd asked you finished up with third, fourth, and fifth grade teaching. How did you end up with this specific focus on handwriting?
Well, it was in that class that it all sort of came, that my understanding of what was going on started really coming to a head. I had started in 7th and 8th grade, so I had teaching in a classroom. So I had a pretty good idea of what was going on with kids and their writing skills at that level. Then I found myself in the younger grades coaching brand new kindergarten teachers and watching what was happening at those beginning years as they were acquiring this skill. It really was a very organic understanding that started to happen as I realized that in that third, fourth, and fifth grade level, I was not able to teach higher level learning because they didn't have a foundational skill that was imperative to their learning.
Wow.
So, I don't even know if I would have stepped out of the classroom had COVID not happened because I was on a good track. I really loved being in the classroom. I really loved being with the kids. I really felt like I was making a difference. And then COVID. So at that point, I'd been considering going to get my PhD. I had been considering this idea that I had that then became Squiggle Squad. And of course, I was pursuing classroom public school education at that point. And so I just decided that I was going to do this with the hope that it was going to make a difference in the lives of more kids, more teachers, and across the states instead of just in my, one classroom 1 year at a time. It was a hard decision, but it opened up doors for me to be able to talk more broadly on this topic and how it affects kids and learning. So that's where how I got into handwriting, and then began the tedious work of figuring out how do we incorporate it into the public school setting where handwriting's not even understood anymore. It's not really even valued. Because I think in large part because of the technology and that sort of wave of technology that poured in, 15 years ago.
So, Holly, I really want to understand sort of the historical timeline around handwriting. So if you could just give us a little bit of overview in terms of, obviously, when we were young, we were doing handwriting in school. At what point did things change, and what is happening as a result of that change?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Arguably, handwriting instruction started to decrease in importance somewhere in the 70s and 80s. But it was really when the one-to-one Chromebooks started going into schools that I think we started to lose connection with the importance of handwriting, not as an art in terms of penmanship, but rather as a tool for learning, because that tool was being usurped by a new higher tech tool. And it seems that that combined with things like Common Core that didn't emphasize handwriting as something to be taught as a skill, but just something to be known and used. So there's very little requirements in the standards. Of course, there's no testing or assessments of handwriting skill, and yet kids are expected to do it. So I think somewhere I would venture a guess that the importance of handwriting that you might see in a parochial school where you're working on cursive, every day and in all grades, that really started falling by the wayside in the 70s and 80s, and replaced with, I think, even if we didn't have the technology in all of those classrooms, I think the mindset started changing around it about that time.
And what are the downsides in terms, I want to look specifically at creativity. What happens when we don't teach handwriting with regards to creativity? Is there a difference?
So it's a big question. So creativity, as you guys well know, is not always this innate manifestation that happens from the heart and head if you just, let yourself explore. It's actually backed by knowledge and skill. And when kids are really, really little, they have intrinsic desire to explore. They have natural curiosity. They have a willingness to please and a desire to know more. And we want to play to those natural bents, but they are able to reach their potential because they gain education and are able to use that to create more, go further, do bigger, expect more of themselves. Handwriting is one of those first forays into a skill that they will use for the rest of their life or whatever. And I like to talk about handwriting as a verb, not a noun. So very often you'll see a handwriting sample and you see it as a thing, like, oh, he has really nice handwriting, or oh, she has really bad handwriting. But if we think of it instead as an action, as something that a child or an adult, a human, uses as a tool to make something, to make a piece of writing, to plan a whatever project you're doing, to fix a problem, to hone a thought. It's a tool that we're using to actually extricate something from our brain that we can then encode and make what is invisible visible to people in order to communicate those ideas. We cannot do that without some sort of training. That is not born in us. Handwriting doesn't come naturally to us the way walking and talking does. It is best done and more utilitarian if it is learned and therefore taught by someone who knows how to do it and gives us the most efficient, healthiest way to use it.
When you referred to it as a verb, I immediately said, I probably should challenge that, because I actually don't write. And if I do write to generate ideas in the way you're saying, I don't actually, I choose to actually scribble them down on a notebook, but I don't have to. However, as you were talking and you were thinking a little bit about the thing that we talk a lot about on the show, is that we need knowledge, we need understanding, we need to be able to think critically in order for us to be creative. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the science. Is there some learning science that says when we engage in the act of writing, we are actually better at processing information and getting to that knowledge that you're talking about? So from a creativity perspective, it might be, we're talking about a modality. For some people, the verb of writing is helpful, but for others, it might not be. However, if it's a tool to construct knowledge and assist us in learning, then we can see those connections to creativity. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I love that you noticed that, because handwriting to an adult is different than handwriting to a child. Remember that we are training a brain. When we are talking about young children, they don't have what you have in your brain. They don't have all the tools that you have picked up along the way. And by tools, I mean cognitive tools, the way that the angles you look at problems, the way you tackle life, the way that you address an issue you've never learned before. They don't have that yet. So when we start with them from a very young age, we are wiring that into all those billions of neurons that are looking for connection, that are looking for understanding, that are trying to figure out the world. And one of the ways we know children learn is kinesthetically. They learn best by moving and touching and experiencing through all of their senses. And when you get a child, I don't know if you've ever taught kids at a very young age, but when you were trying, let's go way back to 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and they're learning letters for the very first time. They're thinking very concretely. Their little brains cannot think abstractly yet. So they see a letter on a page and they think shape. That is a shape, and that shape is called a B. And we are trying to weave in an understanding. We are trying to give them as much experience as we can through turning pages on a book, through letting them see our mouth as we pronounce things, through repeating back to us and mimicking. We are trying to weave into their little brains the understanding of sound and symbol relationship. One of the best, strongest ways to do that is for them to physically trace that movement through that letter. They then make that connection as they move into a more abstract understanding that that letter has a sound, and that sound spells a word, and that we now have to learn how to put those sounds together and spell those things in order to express our thoughts. They cannot, and science 100% backs this up, they cannot learn it the same by pressing it. We call that imprint. When you make an imprint of a letter, it's different than a trace of a letter where you actually map it into your brain. There's a couple really good studies on this. I'd point you to Karen Harris out of Indiana, who's done a great study on the kinesthetic connection to language and how that maps in our brain. But the point of it is that handwriting is a tool for learning. And
Mm.
you have already learned so much more than those littles that are coming up the pipeline. And by the way, there's a lot of research that would argue that they need that kind of kinesthetic connection up through middle school, if not through high school, to continue the journey to mastery, to continue that journey towards language mastery.
It's really interesting, and it makes me think about my own kids. I have 2 children, and one of them has excellent handwriting, and the other one has horrible handwriting, and they had the same teachers growing up. But it makes me think about cursive handwriting. So is there a difference between cursive handwriting and just sort of block lettering? Is there anything that's happening there? Because I noticed that, for a lot of kids, my kids have not learned how to do cursive. And so their signature is actually quite funny because it looks like block hand, when they write their signature, now that they're 18 and 16, it's like block lettering. I'm like, that's not really a signature.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what's happened there in terms of the cursive, and how does that play into this whole equation?
There's a lot there. It's a great insight. I mean, we really need to focus in on a few things that you talked about. First of all, I should probably clarify that when I am talking about handwriting, I'm not talking exclusively cursive. I am definitely talking about the act of writing by hand using a stylus of some kind normally on paper. One thing I'd like to get away from a little bit is handwriting as penmanship, as looking beautiful. In today's day and age, given that we have so many digital tools, those can make our writing legible. And so you could argue that if it's just because I have ugly writing, then I can just use a typewriter I could just use a keyboard and make it neat. I'm not that old. And I did learn on a typewriter, the keyboarding on a typewriter, but I'm telling you, this technology just flooded in so quickly. We really haven't had time to evolve. We're just doing what's right in front of us and hoping we can keep up. But my handwriting is not very nice. I mean, it's legible, but moreover, and way more importantly to me, is it's useful. I can use it when I need it. I have it as a tool in my toolbox. I can pull that out at any moment, and I can use it for different reasons. And people use it for different reasons. Matt, you might not use it to create, but you might use it to write a grocery list, or you might not use it in your office, but you might use it in a restaurant when you have to write something down. And when I wrote a book years ago, and I had endless numbers of napkins that I thought would come to me, and I just jot it down as quickly as possible on the back of a receipt or something. And there it was. And I never thought twice about the fact that I actually had to learn that. It just comes automatically. It's natural to me, but our kids today are not. So Cindy, to answer your question or your observation about your kids, one having neat and one having not so neat, I think the harm in that isn't what your kid's handwriting looks like. It's that we potentially have neglected to give them a human skill that would otherwise be useful to them. And if we think of it as just another modality for creativity, then we would be amiss in not giving it to our kids. There are plenty of professional people down the line who still use handwriting even though they publish on computers. I don't know. I wrote a blog recently on this, but the likes of Sam Altman have regular note-taking protocols that they use to create. He has a system that he wants people to use because he knows that writing by hand mines something out of the brain, gets you thinking, gets your wheels turning in a different way. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It's just a different way.
There's so many thoughts that are popping through my mind now, and I I kind of half of me wants to keep some of them for our debrief episode. But I just had a book I co-edited on generative AI creativity and the precautions, possibilities, and Dr. Robert Sternberg, who we've had on the show, he contributed a chapter, and one of the things that he was basically saying is use it or you lose it. And
That's right.
he's primarily, taking on from kind of a creative thinking perspective. And in his article, he talks about some of the things that we've just lost along the way. And, there's a conversation to be had. And I understand it. What's the value in teaching students to write? And if we were to unpack that, perhaps we get to, well, how much time do we spend on teaching them to write? And maybe that's more of a better conversation, particularly listening to you saying that penmanship is perhaps not the same thing, just having them write. But if we don't have that conversation, or we're not having those conversations based on what you just shared, Dad, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, what if the decisions that we're making right now lead to us not having the ability to write? I mean, that kind of like worries me, because you must be, and I don't know if you've got a take on this, but it's not just keyboards, right? It's tablets. My youngest son, I think he probably was typing on typing on his iPad before he was learning to write with a pen or pencil.
Wow.
What's your take on that? I mean, is obviously I've just said we use it or you lose it, which I think is picking up what you said. But I'm now thinking there and saying even the way we're introducing kids to writing has changed. And I'm just wondering, all of these things has happened without us. I don't know if we've intentionally done that. And I don't know, listening to if there's any science to support that. It's just kind of come about. And that's kind of worrying a little bit.
Well, there's a lot of science that would say we should not abandon the teaching of handwriting. A lot of science. You guys, I can flood your inbox. A lot, decades. So we should not be sweeping that under the carpet as if it doesn't matter to the human brain, because it does. I think a lot of people feel that in their gut. When it comes to handwriting, I feel like people have not pinpointed exactly why it bothers us that we don't handwrite well anymore. But it bothers us. It bothers those of us that do it and know how to do it. I can't tell you how many people I talk to on a regular basis that say, what do you mean they're not teaching handwriting in school? Of course they are. That's like teaching someone to read. You don't not teach them to read. Of course you teach them to handwrite. And then teachers or, people up the pipeline don't understand that if you're not actually addressing handwriting at that level, you're actually not addressing a lot of what it takes to be a writer. English conventions, orthography, the ability to communicate your idea clearly has a lot to do with how you encode language from your brain onto the paper. So that all starts super, super early. And I would liken it, maybe a better way to think about this is in light of, say, sports or an instrument, learning to play an instrument. You go through a time where the mechanics of how to play a game, how to play an instrument, the mechanics are boss. That's what drives your learning at the very beginning. And then you go through, you're practicing the mechanics, and now you're practicing putting into practice. You're practice putting it into play. So now you might have a recital or you might have a tournament. And now you have to take the things you learned in your drills and your mechanics, and now you have to put it. And then that would be like middle school, that would be like from, say, second grade on through to, say, high school, where you're playing the game and you're having to combine the skill with learning how to play the game and actually win the game and do it well. And there's a lot of struggle there. There's a lot of failure there. There's a lot of frustration there. And there is a time when you want to give up. There's a time when you just say, I hate this. Why am I doing it? And a coach or a parent or another teammate comes alongside you and says, you can do this. You're good at it. You've got it. You can do this. And then they move past the struggle and they get to the joy of what it means to play an instrument, to go out and pick up a football game and just be able to play and enjoy the game. That kind of like intrinsic reward is built through hard work and skill building. And I would argue that language requires skills that would then enable a person to find joy in creation. And by not giving that, you might actually hurt a child and not help them reach their potential because they didn't have the skill they needed to go as far as they could have gone.
Hmm. This is all really interesting. It's given me so much to think about. And Matt, I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation in our debrief episode around handwriting and cursive too, because I do want to touch upon that. But right now, what I'd really like to focus in on for those teachers who are listening is, so what advice would you give to them? Because there's so much to think about when they have, and I know kindergarten is a big topic, a big hot topic right now in terms of the expectations of kindergartners. It's much different than when I was in kindergarten. So what advice would you give to teachers who have a lot to cover, but think that handwriting is important? What advice would you give to them or recommendations?
They think it is important or
It is.
So I would say that to treat it like the skill it is at first, especially in those early grades. They need explicit instruction. The science backs that up. They need time practicing, as any good skill building training provides. And then they need a reason to use it. That gives them motivation. So things that might make them happy would be learning how to write their name, which is, where they usually start. And we very often start improperly, which means that you get bad handwriting habits into kindergarten, first and second grade, and then those teachers won't change those habits. If I could use this question to jump into your reference to cursive one more time.
Please.
Right now in society, in culture, handwriting needs to be about efficiency and speed and the ability to get your thoughts on paper, to get you first to hone your thoughts, to clarify your thoughts, and then get it flowing, because if you want your brain to flow, your hand needs to flow. If you want your brain to flow, your keyboarding needs to flow, which, by the way, Matt, and kind of in reference to another question that you had asked earlier, keyboarding one finger at a time, peck, 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 is also not a transcription skill. It breaks up the learning or the thinking flow. And when I was teaching in those third, fourth, and fifth grade classes, I could have let the kids use their keyboards, but they didn't have keyboarding skills either. So there was no transcription skill that allowed them their working memory to, pass that off onto the long-term memory, and allowed their brains to start thinking about those higher level skills. Cursive allows for those ligatures that attach letter to letter to letter, means that you are not having to pick up your pencil as often, and you're getting that flow going. So maybe it looks pretty, maybe it doesn't, but pretty handwriting is a sign of coordinated dexterity that allows for flow. So instead of thinking of it as let's get their handwriting pretty, let's think of it as let's get their handwriting sized properly in the right direction with flow, and probably their handwriting will straighten up.
And you know what I'm taking away a little bit is that, just first of all, being able to write in a way that other people can read your writing, and that's different, right? Because we could theoretically, get that scanned by AI and it quickly generates the word it's passed over, and the act of writing for oneself is I get the motor movements, but that spatial planning, that kind of self-explanation on the page, that relationship between your thoughts and not being in a situation where you're kind of like, having to type it on a keyboard, or even suddenly going and having to open the computer, open the document, put the title on, all of that breaks the flow. And I'm just
That's
sitting
right.
there thinking, there's probably, if I'm a teacher, there might be a benefit me saying, hey, everyone, here's the notepad, the notebook at the beginning of the semester. And I actually have a notebook as well. And it's like,
See?
hey, we're doing this science project. Any ideas that come up, you are welcome to quickly write down some thoughts. Don't worry,
Love
I'm never going to look at them. Doesn't matter how scrappy it is. It's your notebook for you to write whatever you want to write in any moment that you need to do. And I think that's something we probably can do. And I don't think that's going to significantly disrupt probably what we already have planned in the classroom.
Matt, I absolutely 100% agree with you and love those ideas. And I could add a billion more to those higher grades. The problem is, if they were never given those skills early on, handwriting hurts. It hurts their brain. It hurts their hand. They're not taught how to hold a pencil properly anymore. They're not required to make their handwriting useful to them. They're not even doing it enough to feel like it's part of who they are. And so then that's why I came out of the classroom. That was my problem. I needed them to use it as a tool, but they didn't have that tool in their toolbox. And even if I said, hey, get out the tool, they're like, they don't even know what I'm asking. I found myself teaching more of how to use handwriting to get their thoughts on paper than the thoughts that were coming out on paper. And that, by that age, I had taught that age enough to know that should have been easy for them. That should be easy for them. And I'm telling you, in classrooms, it is not easy for them. They hate it. They don't want to do it. And it's not because they can't. It's because they were not taught.
And just one more thing I want to point out is, as I mentioned, I have 2 high schoolers. And now with the onset of AI, they're having a lot more assignments where teachers are giving them those little blue books and saying, I'm going to have you write a paper in your own handwriting in the next hour so that they know that they're not cheating. And so I think having those skills now is going to be even more important, because in high school, that's how they're going to determine these kids wrote it on their own. They sat in front of me with their little blue books and wrote it up. And I think we're in trouble if our kids don't know how to write.
I agree. And on that, handwriting also evidences what they do and don't understand. So if I saw a Substack article where she was showing how she was teaching her third graders about Charlotte's Web, and they had read the blog was on whole book reading, and she showed a sample writing of a third grader writing a sentence that had something to do with the story, and I was shocked that there was not only misspellings, no capital letter at the front, hardly legible. The quality of the sentence was terrible. And that's not to judge the child. That as one observing, as an educator observing, I could tell you a whole lot of things that kiddo did not understand about the English language from what he wrote on that paper. Wrote on that paper. And so we should be using handwriting as an evidence for understanding in all subjects across all the grades. And I love what you had to say about what they're doing in high school. And I will back that up by saying they're also doing that in universities.
Yeah.
And kids are coming in, they're being asked to read entire novels and write essays, and they can't do either because they're not being trained to do that in our schools.
Well, Holly, it's time for us to wrap up, and we've really enjoyed this conversation around handwriting and creativity and what it means in the classroom. Definitely not something we've talked about before. So before we go, we ask all of our guests if they would be willing to share the most creative educational experience you have had and why. So tell us about yours.
Well, that would be a long answer, but I'll answer shortly. My first forays into education was when I started teaching my very first kiddo myself, which was way back in the early 90s. And homeschooling was still kind of underground. Social services could show up at your door and take your kids. And so it was a scary thing. I'd never thought about doing it before, but wow, it opened doors. You talk about creative education. I could tap my kids' potential. I could tap my own potential. We are, I don't think I would be who I am today if I had not educated all 4 of my kids through every grade, every subject, and got to. I mean, they all play music, speak a second language. We traveled. We drew. We just so much creative opening because for myself, because I got to be that hands-on educator from beginning to end.
Thank you.
Well, Holly, thank you so much. As Cindy alluded to, I think we're going to have a really fun debrief conversation around this topic of handwriting. And for our listeners out there, if you think you've got a colleague who's been wrestling with writing instruction lately, maybe someone who's concerned about students' handwriting or to make sense of writing in an increasingly digital classroom, then obviously we do think that this episode is for them. So please share it. And don't forget to subscribe to our Extra Fuel newsletter, which you can find the link to on our website, fuelingcreativitypodcast.com. My name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cindy Burnett. This episode was produced by Cindy Burnett and Matthew Worwood. Our podcast assistant is Ann Fernando, and our editor is Sheikh Ahmed.